Okay, we're good. All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Concordia University's fourth space. Thank you for joining us for today's event, Data Meets Deep Learning, Challenges to and Strategies for Combating Fake News. And just to help situate you, we are streaming to YouTube and we are live from fourth space, located here on unceded Indigenous lands in Tiohtià:ke, Montreal. Here at Fourth Space, we work with our university community to help mobilize knowledge, co-creating daily activities that examine research questions and projects across the university. And we're running today's event also as a live stream Zoom meeting. And so we welcome comments and questions there via the chat. We can read them out during the Q&A. And for those of you joining us here, just raise your hand later on and we'll bring a microphone over to you so that everyone can hear. Okay, with that, it's very much my pleasure to pass the microphone over to doctoral candidate in the Department of Supply Chain and Business Technology Management, and most importantly, a Concordia public scholar, Rana Ali Adeeb. Rana, welcome in.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody, for being here. A special thank you for being here in person. I think today is the coldest day we've had so far this winter, so much appreciated seeing you here. I don't know if we're hearing a bit of an echo with my voice. Are we okay with this? We continue. Okay, perfect. All right, so the topic of discussion today is the challenges and strategies to combat fake news on social media platforms using data and deep learning. Social media platforms have fundamentally changed the way users consume and share information. So on the one hand, users have unlimited access to a plethora of information from a multitude of sources at practically no cost. On the other hand, concerns over the lack of accountability and credibility of information that is posted online has given rise to what's been termed the dark side of social media, which is marked by an increase in the consumption and propagation of fake news. One topic of our discussion today, big data, has provided ways for, or has provided opportunities to identify patterns in misinformation campaigns. But with that come important questions. For example, how do we deal with the scarcity of labeled data sets, especially in under-resourced communities and languages? Also, how do we create a balance between ethics and innovation? Deep learning, the other topic of focus for this panel, provides tools, powerful tools, to combat fake news due to its ability to leverage vast amounts of unstructured data. But how do these deep learning models work, and why are they so effective? Moving forward, what do we see in terms of advancements in combating misinformation? These are just a few of the questions that we will tackle today during our panel. I am delighted to host today two panelists, exceptional panelists, in alphabetical order. We'll start with Mr. Nabil Beitinjaneh. So Nabil is a faculty lecturer and data academic program coordinator at the McGill School of Continuing Studies. So welcome, Nabil. Thank you for being here. And we have Mr. Shibl Mourad, who is a research engineering director at Google DeepMind. So thank you both for joining me. I am thrilled to have you on board and eager to learn from you and your expertise. I will pass it on to you. Maybe just take a minute to tell us a little bit more about yourselves, tell the audience about yourself.
My name is Nabil. I'm responsible for the data program at the McGill School of Continuing Studies. We focus on helping adult learners reskill and upskill to be ready for all the new technologies that are coming up, which involves us having to learn a lot about what's going on and keep up to date.
Hi, my name is Shibl. I work at Google DeepMind. I work in the foundation research unit of DeepMind, where we do a lot of research on language models and reasoning in language models, which I think is one of the tools that would be very interesting to see in the fake news detection space.
Perfect. So thank you both for joining me. With that said, we're going to dive in. We'll start with our first question, and this is regarding big data, and this one's directed to Nabil. So Nabil, how can we leverage big data analytics to identify emerging patterns of misinformation? And what can we do, or what ethical considerations do we need to keep in mind when we are applying these tools?
I'll start off by saying I'm already a moderator on Twitter, X to be more precise, just so I have some experience with moderating and being involved with it. So today we have access to many platforms, whether it's X, Blue Sky, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and we are consuming, as Rana said, a lot of information. And we're generating a lot of information. So there's a lot of things that we can do using big data, including monitoring who's talking to who. We call that network analysis. We also look at sentiment analysis when messages are being passed around. What are we saying? What is the tone being used? There's a lot of different things we can do. There's what we call temporal analysis. How is information propagating through the network? And in recent times, we are doing multimodal type analysis, because when we're looking at messages, we're dealing with video, audio, text, and combinations thereof. All of these are incredibly interesting from what we would call a research perspective, and from an applied perspective is how do we figure out what is misinformation and what isn't? What is real and what isn't? What is grounded in reality and what is just an opinion? We have a lot of challenges as a society also. The responsibility goes in many different ways. We have companies that are managing these platforms. We have delegated to them the responsibility to take care of all of this fake news, what's real, what isn't. And we have told them, or they're telling us how they're doing it. And we have different approaches, which we'll touch on in a further question, which is, we have community notes, we have, Facebook or Meta has their own method of doing it, using companies and their own moderation. So there's many different ways that things are happening. However, all of these impact us as individuals, and we need to be aware of what's going on. And I think this is an excellent forum to start or to continue the discussion, because many people are having these discussions right now, and work together on it.
Perfect. So in terms of the ethical considerations, what do you think we should be considering when applying these tools and when implementing them?
Well, from an ethics perspective, we're dealing with many levels of problems. One of them is, what is misinformation? Like, even let's start at the basic point, which is what is fact, what is in fact, and what is opinion? Like, let's start with the very basic part of any discussion, which is, if I do not like a certain politician and I don't like their platform, is it a fact or is it an opinion? Should I be moderated or not? What's been happening from an ethics perspective also is, how do we help communities that are marginalized, or how do we make sure that people are not excluded from the discussion? Mm-hmm. If we're dealing with opinions, how do we make sure that the dominant narrative does not exclude all the other people? How do you make sure that people are not deplatformed? Like, this is something which is happening or happens quite often, where people get deplatformed for multiple reasons. Either they're uploading something which is copyrighted, or they're talking about certain topics which we're not supposed to talk about, or are controversial. So what happens is they will get, there's different levels. Sometimes you get warnings, sometimes you get pushed out nicely. What happens at that point? And this does have an impact. And Shibl, I think we did have a discussion at that at one time or another about the soccer player or the son of the announcer who is being deplatformed on a regular basis from YouTube, and how, what can we do about it? Because all of these are now being done in an automatic manner. So this is an issue. Do we need a human in the loop? At what level do we moderate? At what level do we throttle or stop the discourse? And these are big discussions that need to happen, and we have to be part of that discussion. It's not something that could be just given to the companies, because to a very high extent, also, moderation costs money and costs resources, and there is not always a big interest by all companies to do it. And we have seen recently a change, let's say with Meta, where they said, our current way of moderating will change. We want to follow more the community notes model, let's do it, let's go about it, let's move in that direction. So what does that mean? Is one method better than another? What has been proven, and this is also where people like us, people in this room who are coming from an academic background can help by doing the studies, etc. One last thing I'd like to say is yesterday, or I was aware of it yesterday, there was a report issued by Yoshua Bengio and 100 other scientists from around the world called the International Security Report on AI. And they do actually talk about moderation. They do talk about, they don't call it fake news, but they talk about content moderation and how parties can use social media to propagate messages and change how we think about different items.
Very interesting. Thank you.
You were taking some notes. Do you want to say anything?
I have a few points because you mentioned that the platforms are doing a lot of this moderation. And I think this is something that in the future, it would be great if the user does it. What I mean by the user, it's decoupled from the platform. So you can install something on your phone or on your desktop that you decide what you are installing. And by installing that thing, it will check everything, whatever platform you have. So you are not basically slave to the platform and the decision of the platform owners on what to do. And this is both a technical challenge and an educational challenge. First, we need to educate the user that this is useful. But the other thing is, technically, it has to be done in a way that doesn't consume a lot of battery time on the phone or compute on a desktop. So that's, I think, an interesting challenge. The other one is about ethics. One dimension that I think is very, very important is related to the first one is user choice and transparency. Because one of the big problems of fake news is not only the technical detection of fake news, is that, okay, let's say you detected this is fake. Why would the user trust that what you say is fake is fake? And now there is more and more distrust in institutions, in science, in companies, in governments. So every basically institution that in the past used to serve as a source of truth is being mistrusted by a subset of the population.
That's right.
So I think if we want to remove that, we want to give the users more choice, more transparency, so they can feel that they are controlling the situation. And by controlling it and saying, okay, if I change this knob, this is what's going to change, they start trusting these systems more than if it was somebody at some company deciding for them, this is fake and this is not fake.
Absolutely. And I think that feeds into the phenomenon of explainable AI, so the XAI. For those who are not aware, it's basically a phenomenon that is doing exactly what Shibl is saying. It's enhancing people's trust. It improves the credibility. There's accountability for the fake news that you're coming across. And how it does so is that it's basically making the decision-making process that it has more transparent. So this is how you would be able to more trust that, all right, this is fake news versus this is fact, and so on and so forth. So that's a great point.
Yeah, when it comes to explainable AI, we need it. And why is it so? Because the algorithms and how we do moderation is a black box. When we test or when we give a label, this is fake news, we may not trust the organization that gave it to us. But even the organization may not know why it has happened, because it's done algorithmically. So we have to, there's been a big push, not just everyone has been pushing to add that layer of explainability so we can explain to people why they're being deplatformed or throttled or not been given a platform to, their messages are going on the bottom of the queue, etc. So Shibl touched on something which is very important. The people, us. Critical thinking is paramount, meaning we have to educate ourselves and educate those around us on how to interpret how or why something is happening. What's behind the scene? Why is it important to understand the sources of information? Narratives. If we don't understand these things, everything else is useless. And this is why it's important, and I like Shibl's approach or idea of it should be the users, or they should have the ability to test or cross-test or validate the input. We should be able to see why, we're getting this is a fake message or not.
Mm-hmm. Did you have another? I saw you scribbling something else.
I will keep scribbling, so probably you can go to your question.
All right, well, the second question is directed to you, Shibl. So can you share examples of how deep learning models are being used by social media platforms to flag and verify content?
Yeah, so first, don't forget deep learning is being used both to flag content, but to create fake content. Mm-hmm. And that, I think, is a big danger that we have to think about, is the quality of fake content is becoming much and much better with these deep learning models, especially video generation, which is extremely powerful and could change the landscape. I think we're just starting to see the effect of that technology. On what is being used on the platforms themselves, to be honest, I don't know, because I'm more working on the research side than on the product side. But from a research perspective, there are a bunch of techniques. And this research has been going on for over 30 years. So we start with the most simple technique, which is you basically take the text, you count how many words are this word, and that word, and so we call this bag of words, and then we do basically the frequency of each of these words, and then we compare this to the frequency of what is typically fake and what is typically non-fake, and with that we can, with a very simple probabilistic approach, we can have a detector. And even these very simple detectors that, it's probably half a page of code, can achieve accuracy of something like between 50% and 60%.
Which is impressive.
Which is very impressive.
Yeah.
But it speaks to something more fundamental, is that these fake news are not so fake. What I mean is that there's two aspects of fake news, is that would a reasonable person know it is fake? Mm-hmm. And the answer is most of the time, yes. And they're obviously fake to anybody who is critically thinking about it. But then there's two effects that come that encourage the users to share them. One effect is that there's confirmation bias. They're biased in a certain way, and you show them fake news in a way that they are biased about, then they will say, yeah, of course this is true, because it confirms what I like. The other aspect, which is even more, I think, important, is the identitarian value that they get from sharing the fake news. So by sharing the fake news, they are basically saying, I belong to that or this tribe. And they don't care if the news is true or false, actually. So most users, they're just sharing the news, regardless if it's fake or false, if they derive sociological benefit from that sharing. Then there's another aspect, which is inattention. There has been some research that showed that lots of the fake news sharing is happening because people are just looking around, okay, I get a message, this message is from that person, okay, I'm going to share it without even reading it. And this inattention is related to the sociological benefit they get from sharing, and is related for inattention as well. But because they have sociological benefit, they don't care if it's fake or not. Mm-hmm. So this is at the basic level, you can detect a lot of fake news like this. And then the challenge is not detecting it. The challenge is, how do we convince users, or how do we change the equation so that the user is not deriving benefit from sharing the fake news?
Right.
And this is actually not a technical problem, it's a sociological problem. I don't have any insights on how to do it, but I think that's a big challenge, because even if we detect fake news, some people will still want to share it, even if they know that it has been detected. And because they don't trust the institution, that's even worse, because you tell them it's fake, but they don't trust you.
That's right.
So this was, sorry, I went on a tangent, but I was going through the techniques. So on the most simple technique is bag of words, as I said, very simple. And then over time, all the techniques that were developed for machine learning were used for fake news. So you can do clustering. So by clustering, you take articles and you put them in groups. And then when you get a new article, you say, okay, what is the nearest cluster I have to that article? And then you look at that cluster, is it fake or not fake? If it is fake, then you say, okay, this article is fake. So this technique as well, very simple, has been around for decades and is very effective. Then, okay, you go more, Then with neural networks, we advanced some techniques. Then you have more advanced. So initially what I said is you have the bag of words where you just count the words. But now two words could be exactly the same meaning, but you're counting them as two different words. So then you can have word embedding. So in word embedding, it's really beautiful, is that you take a word, but you turn it into a bunch of numbers. And then these numbers, so you can imagine, let's say you turn a word into 3 numbers, 3 dimensions. So now the word would be sitting in a space, in a 3-dimensional space. And then if you take another word, you can see how close it is to this word. So now you're not only counting the words, you're looking at the meaning of the words, and you can see their position in space, and then you can do lots of things that you do with objects with these words. So you can do it with words. Then the more advanced techniques is you do it with whole sentences. So doing it with words is called embedding, and you can do a word, what is it,
Vectorization.
Vectorization, word to vec. That's
Word to vec.
So word to vec. Then you can do glove, where you do a whole sentence. You can take the whole sentence and put it on a space, not necessarily 3 dimensions, it could be 100 dimensions. And then more advanced, I think this is what we're getting now with LLMs, which LLM is large language models, is now not only we can take the sentence itself, but we can take the sentence given its surrounding. So with that, you can do more advanced embedding. And for this, you can use models. All the models that we use today for LLMs are very interesting. So you have...
Sorry, go. I just wanted to know how effective these LLMs are in being able to,
Exactly.
Are
so all of these techniques, the way these things are tested is we have data sets of facts and falsehoods. So these data sets are used by researchers to test their ideas. And then on these data sets, so you take, for example, all the Snopes verdicts, true or false. And Snopes goes through a lot of work to determine if this is true or false. So then you run these algorithms, which are relatively simple, and you are getting a performance going from 50%, as I said, from the most basic things, to going up to 90% with more advanced things. And this is all what is coming next, which relates to explainability that Nabil was discussing, is now when you talk to different language models like ChatGPT or DeepSeek or any of these models, you can see that the latest models, not only do they give you an answer, they give you what's happening in the back of their mind, like thinking traces. So basically they tell you, oh, I've been thinking about this, I checked this page, I did this and I did that, and at the end I give you the answer. So I think this is the next phase of fact-checking, where you are going to use these thinking models, not only to give an answer, but to actually go out, gather information from the web, compare this information, and then give you an explanation of why it arrived at this answer, and then gives you the answer.
Yeah, it's the transparency aspect, the accountability aspect, and that's in part what wreaked havoc on the stock system 2 days ago, the tech industry, because people were saying that DeepSeek, as opposed to OpenAI's model, is more explainable, right? It's open source, so people can understand how it's arriving at the conclusions that it's giving us. So that's always an interesting point. You mentioned something about the data sets, being trained, and that's actually one point that I'd like to bring up as perhaps a challenge, because we do have a scarcity of labeled data sets. So whether we're talking from a fake news perspective or really anything else when we're training any kind of model, how can we address this scarcity of labeled data sets, specifically in contexts where, for example, we have an under-resourced language or an under-resourced region? So what's your take on that?
Okay, so I think this problem is going to become less and less of a problem because right now these models are pre-trained. So what does it mean to have a model that's pre-trained? So in the past, we used to train a model. So you have a specific problem. I want to detect if this is a glass or this is a tin. And I would give it 1,000 images of glass and 1,000 images of tin. And then I say, okay, train a model to do this. And it can do only that thing. The new models that we have are pre-trained. What does it mean that's pre-trained? That it looked at all the images in the world and all the text all the images that you give it, plus all the text that you give it. And now when you have a new task, you don't need to train it again. You can just ask it. You might give it a few examples to explain what you mean by glass or what you mean by tin if it doesn't know the meaning of these words. But then you are not using training. You are using, so now you are using the model's pre-trained capabilities. Now, on top of that, if you add to it the reasoning capabilities, not only is it pre-trained and give you a quick answer, it's pre-trained and can think about the problem and go through it in the same way that if you want to train a fact checker, you don't give them a million examples. You actually explain to them what is fact checking. And once you explain to them what is fact checking and what is the process of fact checking, they can do it. And if they understand the language, even if you train them in Arabic, and then you ask them to do it in English, if they know English, they will be able to do it. You don't need to re-explain the process to them in English.
More efficient, yeah.
So for low resource language, they can use all the text in that language that's nothing to do with fake news. But they can apply the reasoning that was discovered through all the work on fake news and apply it to the low resource language.
Very interesting.
I agree, but not completely. In the sense that, and I have used most of the LLMs in multiple languages. Up to now, and I know that there's an evolution that's constantly happening, the answers you get in multiple languages are very different today, even though they're pre-trained, and you would expect that if you ask a question in one language, you ask the same question in another language, you'll get something very similar. But there's also cultural context that comes on top of it. One of the things that we see, or I feel that happens a lot when we're dealing with fake news or opinions on different topics, is what I would call, there's the emotional factor. I know this is one of your areas. One of the reasons we propagate news, etc., or we think something is true with a confirmation bias, but there's also culture. Like when one of the examples, if we want to take a historical example, is if we take sayings or something that Che Guevara said a while back, would that be considered today to be fake news or not? It depends on the narrative. Are you on one side of the fence or on the other side of the fence? And what are we training on? We're training today mostly on North American, or I wouldn't say North American, but what's out there, which is Western, European, white, I would say mostly, text. What about the other ones? And this changes. One of the difficulties, and I do work in multi-languages, is sometimes when you're doing translations, even when you're trying to do translations, it's very difficult to get the sense of what the person is saying. You can take it from a very simple example, just look at Rumi and try to translate, or look at the poetry that he did and try to read it in another language. You lose the richness. And this is something that the translators or people spend a lifetime trying to get the tone right, to try to get things correct. Now we're adding to it, we're asking, and I'm going to use the word machines to make the decision. Now, it makes it more difficult. I'm not going to say, what we have to be very careful about, or what we're looking for, is when we talk, especially when we talk about fake news, we want to mitigate damage. You know, let's say, for example, yesterday night, there was an airplane that hit a helicopter. Immediately, people came up saying, this helicopter belonged to X or Y, and this is what happened. There was community notes that came up saying, no, the army said this said this, these are the sources, and there's a label put to it. So these are things where you want to immediately catch it. And this is where I would say the algorithms today that look at frequency, that look at what's going on, are amazing, because we know something is happening and there's an interest. Suddenly there's a lot of repetition happening, a lot of sharing. Okay, let's look at it. Let's see, should we put a warning? Should we tell people, slow down a bit? We don't have enough information yet. What should we do at this point?
So do you think that there's a piece missing to that puzzle? So we have all these, these AI models, this automated detection. Do we need a human element? Is there a need for a human element? And I know you have somewhat contradicting opinions about this, so this question is directed to the both of you.
I will let Nabil go first.
I'm a big believer in human in the loop, where we do need people to be part of the process, whether the decisions are being made something has been flagged, you need humans to be involved. Now, one of the issues with humans being involved is that you go back to the same problem. Who are these humans? What are their biases? Are they all part of the same group? How do we deal with this? I know that from the community notes on Twitter, actually the choice of people is done in a way that they choose people that have differing opinions. And the notes move up when you have people that are coming from different camps, if we can use that term, agree on that there should be a note or not. This is what makes it very interesting, is that they actually do look at that. Now, on the negative side, you're depending on humans, and humans are lazy. Sometimes they don't have enough time. They don't have all the right context. I get asked to review a lot of French tweets. What about them? Well, some of them are not French that I know, or they're dealing with problems that I'm not aware of, let's say in France or in Europe or somewhere else in Africa, where I do not have the context required to understand. Even if I read the references, I cannot input on the problem. Now, what a lot of people do is they'll still input, oh yeah, there's a nice reference here, all the criteria that they have put are met, but they're not really looking at it. And this has been a complaint by some people where, I'm looking at the other side, where they were complaining about community notes, is that even the community notes people are not reading the references that are there. Where there was one particular person, his name is Arnaud something, I forget his last name, but I follow him, and he was complaining. They said, the reference is actually saying exactly what I'm saying. Why is there a community note? And his thesis is that people are too lazy to even read. They see, okay, there's a reference. It looks like Wikipedia. It looks reasonable. Okay, good. They don't have to read everything. And we do have to go sometimes 1 or 2 levels down before making a judgment.
Yeah, so I don't want to disagree, because I think what you said, I mostly agree with what you said, especially with the technology today. Today we're still at the infancy of all of these techniques. I do think that if we think about the human level of the person who's like the employee they get an alert that, okay, this is a piece of news classified as fake or not fake, and they have to do it within 10 minutes. I think that part might be better done with a machine. But there's a deeper part that is done by humans. One is, how do you set the system itself? That there's lots of human choices in there. And even more fundamentally is, when we say this is fake news, what do we mean by this? We probably mean that it has not been confirmed by sources that we trust. Because at the end, you need a foundation, because obviously the machine is not going to go out to the world and actually run an experiment and find the result of the experiment. They are going to rely on sources. So these sources are done by humans. And so, for example, it could be that you trust certain newspapers, or you trust certain TV stations and you don't trust others. So first, these sources themselves are powered by humans. And secondly, the person who's selecting which sources to trust and which sources not to trust is a human, or is using an algorithm that was designed to create a certain view of what they think is fake and what is not fake. So, I mean, at the end, you can get, there's lots of turtles, but at the bottom, there is a human somewhere.
Yeah.
So where we probably disagree is, I think probably in the future, the mechanical aspect of like this verifier could be relieved and done by a machine. But again, this is to be, determined. When it happens, we'll see it, exactly, yeah.
Where I see things, I'm not disagreeing with that. Actually, to scale, you need to use deep learning, you need to use all these techniques, because the amount of tweets or messages going on Facebook or Instagram is out of this world from a numbers perspective. You cannot do it using humans all the time. But where I see the human in the loop is when somebody is flagged, throttled, deplatformed, they should have a mechanism to object and get a resolution, at least an answer saying, hello, yes, we're looking at it. You have been, put aside. You have been deplatformed for the following reasons. Show us or explain to us why not. And somebody looks at it. It's not just you're dealing with the machine. and the machine keeps giving you the same answer over and over and over again. That's where I see, the laziness happening when it comes to the bigger corporations. It's just like, you solve it on your own, or go to the forums and get an answer. And if you don't have an answer, too bad, too sad, you're only one person. Who do we care? We don't care. It's not we don't care about you. We don't have time to look at you. But deplatforming is very serious. I know recently there was someone I follow who does a lot of math videos and has been working on YouTube for years and years and years. He got deplatformed, and virtually he was crying. It's like, I did all this work and I'm off and I don't know who to talk to. I believe he was reinstated after a lot of work. However, not everyone has that energy and the time and the notoriety to reach out. On Twitter, you have people that go straight to Elon Musk and say, hey, I've been deplatformed. Why are my follower numbers dropping like crazy? Explain. And then, Elon will every now and then show his magnanimous nature and just go and say, okay, fix. He won't say it's fixed. The other person will come back saying, hey, it's been fixed.
Right.
So we cannot depend on the whims of people. And this is where the human in the loop is important, or at least having mechanisms to do it.
A system in place, yeah.
This brings us to and I would love to hear the opinion of everyone else on this one. Why did Meta change their methods? They were going with the approach of, we work with companies we trust, fact-checking companies, and everything we do should, be vetted by all these organizations that we choose, that have a lot of diversity, etc. Now, my reading of the situation was, one, it cost them a lot of money. Two, they were getting a lot of pushback from people saying, these groups are very biased to start off with, so the fact-checking is biased. And with the change in direction in the USA that happened recently with Trump, there was this big push towards more of a free speech, let's just go with that term, which was championed by Elon and Twitter. So it was viewed that, hey, we save some money, we push it back on the people, let's create community notes. It's less of a hot potato for us from that perspective. Now, I could be incredibly biased in what I'm saying right now. This is why I say I turn it to other people to correct me or give their opinion on this.
Yeah, I think this is why we need to give the power to the user themselves. So they are not subject to the whim of companies. So the user installs whatever software they want. If they love software designed by this company, they can buy it. They can buy open source. They can get open source software for free, and encourage building an environment where these tools exist and the users can select multiple tools and try them and see which ones work for them. I think that will get us out of these situations where a CEO or a company can decide one day to change policy in a way that's probably inconvenient for you.
We're facing a lot of interesting, now we get back at the end to the human. We have people that still believe today that the earth is flat, the flat earth society. And these people are not in a cave. They're actually, even on Twitter, you can engage with them. We have people today, and I know people that are very close to me that'll tell you that the moon landing was fake. It was all done in a studio in LA. Okay? Very interesting. So how can you fix, and do you need to fix that? Those are different things where, is it important? Is it not important? But what I always find interesting is that at the end of the day, we have to work with the people. We have to help them develop critical thinking. I believe someone took one of the flat earthers recently on a trip up into space to see the horizon and the earth curving, and it's like, they came back with a different opinion, but that cost around $250,000 to convince one person to change their mind, but they were an influencer, so maybe it was worth it, maybe it was not. We have a lot of work in front of us. That's what I'm going to say.
That actually feeds very well into my next question, which is, let's say we're in 2030. So it's January 30th, 2030, 5 years from now. What do you see, and we kind of touched upon this with the explainable AI aspect, but what do you see in terms of advancements in data-driven deep learning methods to combat fake news? Like, where do you see us going from here?
I will let you.
To both of you.
No, you can start.
I mean, I think I touched on it. I believe that the biggest advance will come from these thinking models. But so for me, that's where the problem today we have is these thinking models. First, they're in their infancy. And secondly, they take time and a lot of energy and money to run. So you cannot run them on every message. So probably until they become super cheap, there will be a stack of techniques, starting from very simple technique that can detect this is an outlier, and then this goes to a next model, and then probably like 3 layers, and at the probably 4th layer, there is a human, in some cases where the system cannot decide. So I think between now and 5 years, we are going to go through that transition of adding more and more thinking layers, probably between, because right now the problem with the humans as well is that there isn't enough of them. So which means that many things are going through without being checked. So I think on the technical side, I think there will be a transition to that. But on the other hand, the new challenge is going to be that the models themselves will be amazing at creating fake content. So that's a new challenge that we still haven't encountered 100%. And I worry mostly about the video domain because video is the most believable. Because people have been used to seeing text that's fake, but they still haven't been used to seeing video that's fake. So, and then today, if you look at text, you don't believe it. Like there is no reason for you to believe it unless you have very good reason to believe it, which was not the case. So, I mean, even 10 years ago, people would say, oh, I read this somewhere, as if it's true. Like I just read it, it must be true. Today, it's not the case. Everybody knows that text is full of garbage. But now we still believe, even images, we say, okay, this is doctored. So people have been used to images being doctored. So I think we will go through a transition phase where we will think video is true, and then we'll discover it's not true, and then you get bitten 3 or 4 times, and then you discover, okay, you learn your lesson, but then if you learn that lesson, then you don't believe any video. Then, okay, when we go back to what's the source of truth, okay, what's the source of truth? You don't believe the video, you don't believe the text, you don't believe the newspapers, you don't believe the government, you don't believe the scientists. What can you believe? So this is where I think if we have advancement that can give us with a high confidence if this video is fake or not fake, and there is some research on that level, I think that can make the situation slightly better.
Yeah, it makes sense.
There's also a lot of work going on flagging, or within the pictures themselves, make it known, or you can tell it's a fake or not. Same thing when it comes to video. There's work happening over there. It's not watermarking, that's one way to do it, but watermarks are very easy to take out because you know what to look for. Let's use the word more reliable organizations, the one we trust, when they generate pictures or pictures are being created, they could add an identifier saying this is the source, and that also will become part of the bigger picture of what's true and what's not, or where at least what the source is. At one time or another, there was a lot of discussion about using blockchain to put certain information on it, to make sure that it's traceable. We know where it's coming from. We know we cannot be altered along the way. There's all these discussions going on. Reality is very different because there's cost considerations, there's practical considerations. We'll see how it will play out as we move forward, but it also takes a certain amount of regulation to come into place. This is something that is not talked about a lot, and most companies do not like to hear the word regulation, law, because that may or may not, in general, for many companies, they'll consider regulation as something that slows down companies. Putting a law in place means that compliance has to happen. You have to have people that look at it. You have to have people that verify it within the company. You have to monitor, you have to report, and there may be financial penalties attached to it. So many companies do not like the regulatory side of things. We have heard when, you know, if we go back to the Meta days, when Zuckerberg was being interviewed by Congress, he kept saying, I look forward to regulation. I want regulation because that will make my life easier. Because I don't necessarily believe what he's saying in that particular sentiment, but I do agree when there are rules in place or laws that people have to follow, it makes it easier for them to know what they should do or what they shouldn't do, and what's the minimum we have to do
Abide by. Yeah.
and live by.
Yeah, so I think not necessarily regulation, even though regulation could be necessary in some situations, but at least coordination. So that there is a system that can establish that this video is at least approved by a certain organization. And this allows anyone who runs a system on their platform or on their device to say, okay, I'm going to check this list of organizations that I trust, and I want to see if this video exists and has been approved by one of these organizations, then at least I know that there is trust I can attribute to that video. So this doesn't necessarily need regulation, but it needs standard. It needs some standardization.
Which we do not have right now.
Yeah, and it goes back to Nabil's point, is that at the end it is humans. Because at the end I'm going to trust that a human said this video is true. Because I can't trust, an AI cannot give me that validation. The only thing AI can give me is that this video looks like another video that somebody said that was true.
That's right. Yeah, it's the frame of reference. Okay, so taking all of this into consideration, how do you think we can better educate future professionals on, dealing with these both opportunities, great opportunities, as you pointed out, but also very important challenges? How can we make people more aware of this, especially, like I said, the future professionals who are going to be very much immersed into this, way more than we are today? You are the academic.
Yes,
so.
I'm the academic here. Currently, as part of the courses I teach, we have a course called Data Science for Business Decisions. It's about AI, machine learning, and how it's applied. Shibl used to come and lecture in that one every now and then. The second class today is a class on ethics. And we have around, I think, class number 6 or 7, another class on critical thinking. Why? An algorithmic bias, etc. We consider, at least I consider, let's be more precise, but I talk for multiple people on this one, that understanding the issues for professionals working is essential. You cannot say, I'm just developing a machine learning model. You have to understand, well, what does it mean? You have to know, actually, we do have a section on AI and law. We bring in a lawyer to talk about it. You have to know that if you're developing AI, maybe in your company, you're not going to deal with a lawyer, but your organization should be dealing with a lawyer. These are essential things. Now, that's one course, one program. It's up to us, really, to make this as part of our education, part of our way of working. What is critical thinking? How does it work? And it's not just talk. You have to do it through examples. These are things that you can only do through examples. You cannot do it through, okay, well, we have confirmation bias. We have this. Okay, these are all nice words. What does it mean? What is confirmation bias? What is, negativity? What is this or that when it comes to algorithmic bias? What is transparency? What is impact? These are all topics that you need to go beyond, actually. You can't do it even in one class. These are things that take long discussions that have to happen within groups like this, where you will have opposing viewpoints. I actually enjoy having discussions with Shibl and other people, with Rana, and we have these discussions that go all over the map. It's good because nobody has the full picture, and nobody is always going to be right about everything. So we need to have these discussions, but how do you create these discussions? How do you make sure people know about them? If you're talking about in terminology that nobody else understands, it's useless. And this is where you have to come down to earth. And I think one of the questions I think we got on LinkedIn, are we going to talk at a level that everybody understands? And that's one of the challenges that panelists, academics, PhD students, everyone else has, is how do we talk at the level of everyone? How do we work at their level, especially that we have learned with time to build up multiple levels of abstraction and work with very complicated thoughts and ideas that people may not understand.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I think there's two levels of education. One is at very, very early age education, which is teaching children how to be skeptical. So just the art of being skeptical about everything. So question, why is this happening? And obviously children have it naturally, but we need to encourage them to be systematic about it. Mm-hmm. Now, so this is obviously, this is not my domain, but closer to my work is, if we look at AI, there has been a radical shift in AI in the past, I would say 3 years. So 3 years ago, to do any AI work, you needed to do a lot of work, study AI, understand it inside out. And we were at a situation where if you study AI for 8 years, you probably know nearly everything. You can read any paper in the topic and understand it, and you can build a model from scratch and design something. So it takes you 8 years to become machine learning experts, and at that level, you are probably excellent. Like you're probably doing what anyone can do. Today, it's two things happened. One is you don't need to be an expert at all to use AI and to build AI systems, because AI systems have become because they are using language, and all of us understand language. So AI has become much, much, much easier to use, but there is still this halo around it that it needs experts, while actually experts sometimes even harm because they're still thinking in the mode that they used to think 3 years ago, while today the world is much different. It's like people who used to understand networks before the internet, and you ask them to build the website, they don't know how to build the website because they're still thinking in the old world of networks, which was much more complex. So, and on the flip side, on the AI side, no one knows how these systems work. So it's not anymore that if you study 8 years, you understand everything about AI. Nobody understands everything because it has become so complex that if you want to build a system like DeepSeek or OpenAI or Gemini, it takes 200 people minimum to work together for 6 months to 2 years to build something like that. Mm-hmm. So it has, at one side, became very, very complicated to build, but on the other hand, it became super easy to use. So now it's become more democratic, more accessible to everyone. And I think we need to make that obvious to people, is that everybody can use it, especially if you are a software developer. Any software developer can use AI in a very, very simple way and achieve results that are probably better than the experts.
Very nice, yes.
There is a point I want to remind people. Most of us are parents, uncles, family members. So yes, we can and we should influence or teach the critical thinking to those who we can influence. So we can go beyond who we are right now, because we're not unidimensional. Like I'm Nabil, but I have a lot of different parts to me, or a lot of different personas and groups that I work into. So this is a huge challenge that we face, which is how do we educate the next generation, which is something. What Shibl was talking about is very true. And now we're still talking a lot about AI, or it's the word to talk about, or the topic to talk about. The truth is, AI is becoming invisible at the same time too. I'm looking at someone in the audience who works with pictures a lot and graphics. Well, today you can go to the big programs, Adobe, etc., and give it a picture. You can very quickly just do some quick changes, take out people, put in faces, take out faces. It's incredible what you can do, and you do not need the technical knowledge. Like previously, you needed a lot of technical background to do it, and I agree with Shibl on this one, because I come from the school, I had to learn everything, and I'm still learning everything to teach the basics, yet the game has moved forward. You know, when I'm teaching today people how to code, well, we're using tools to do it. I don't have to have them build code from zero. So it's kind of, and I keep getting questions, should we learn how to code? And the answer is, I still believe the answer is yes. We can and I would like to have discussions on that one or arguments on that particular topic. However, for beginners, what you can do with ChatGPT, Claude, Studio AI, etc., is out of this world. You can build, you can do things, but you hit a certain point, and this is why I tell people you have to learn code. You hit a certain point where to move forward, you have to understand what's going on.
Very interesting. Any other comments? Well, I think that concludes the list of questions I had for today. I don't know if the audience has any questions related. Yes, so right there is my supervisor, Dr. Amir Hosseini.
We should be asking him questions.
Also, everyone joining us online, if you have any questions, you can pop those into the chat. We can read them out for you.
Well, thank you very much for this thought-provoking conversation. Thank you, Rana, for organizing it. I want to go back to the point about critical thinking that you mentioned, I think both of you, that we know from the research that critical thinking is associated with even performance on simple critical thinking tasks shows how people is associated with the ability to identify fake content. When you look at, and one way is to work with youth on developing, like say, data literacy, news literacy, social media literacy, all this type. But the other point is that when you look at ordinary people, they have critical thinking ability, but they can't use it, or they don't use it on social media platform. So my research was on how we can encourage people to actually use their critical thinking capacity. We are not that bad. So if you look at the stats from all studies, it's like 50%. It's like flipping a coin. But when you remind people through different interventions, we tried one and it worked, it like increased their ability to detect information, fake information by 15 to 20%. But how can we use the available data to encourage the existing users to use their own critical thinking capability? And I think one challenge that can be discussed here is also the role of context, that we used to read news in a different context. Now it's like 80% entertainment and 20% real news. We're not really in the analytical mode to critically analyze the information that we are seeing. But I want to know your opinion on how can we use data to encourage people to be more critical, to use their own critical capabilities. Thank you.
Thank you, Mahdi.
Okay. So two aspects. First is, there's two things. One is having the critical thinking to be able to detect that this is true or false. And the other one is to want to do that. So as I said, it seems that I've seen some research that users actually they are not motivated to do it because they don't get social benefit. So they are getting social benefit if they are part of a certain group to share certain kinds of news. Even they don't care if it's fake, and the recipients don't care it's fake. But it's creating like it's an identitarian signature that they are sending. So they are not telling you this is true. They're telling you this is who I am by sharing this piece of information. And so the question is, so this I don't know the answer, but can you flip the equation a bit? For example, like making sure that people care about truth, in the sense that if you share something that's not true, it's shameful. So you have actually some sort of social cost to share something false. So many times when I want to share something, if I share it in a certain place, I would be much, much more careful because I know these people will go into everything. So if I'm sharing something with researchers, I will go and read the references and make sure that the references are correct, and even check how the methodology and all of these things before I share it, because if I share it, I know they will come back to me and say, wait, you shared this, but this is stupid and you didn't think of this and that. But if I'm sharing it in a place that's not the same context, I might share it more casually and say, okay, oh, I look cool if I share this piece of information, let me share it. So I think there is an element of social engineering that, I mean, social engineering is probably an ugly word, but there is an element of thinking about it from a social perspective, not only from a true versus false perspective. The other thing that I was telling Nabil, I saw some research while preparing for this conference, which I found pretty amazing. Again, I'm going to say with caveat because I'm not sure, like the sample set seems to be very small, but they tested people on fake news detection, and they checked eye movement. And from eye movement, the person they can detect if this fake or not with some certainty that is higher than the person themselves, what they say. So the people instinctively knew it was fake, but they didn't, so subconsciously they knew it was fake, which I found very interesting.
That's actually interesting that you say this just before, because we are actually planning an experiment where we are going to be using eye tracking exactly because of that. Our research is on the impact of emotion on the perception of fake news on social media, but we are going to be measuring using electrodermal activity. So basically that's our measure of arousal. We will be looking at eye tracking as well. So maybe the research that you looked at is, maybe you can forward that to me and I can take a look at it as well. Yes, go ahead.
As humans, we hate cognitive dissonance. We cannot take it too well. You know, when you have to change your worldview on a topic, whether it's small or big, we don't take it too well. Let's say somebody tells me I use a certain word a lot in a discussion I'm having, or when I'm using when I'm speaking a different language. They have to be, one, I have to trust them. They have to trust that I will not flip when they tell me I repeat a word 20 times in a sentence. And I have to be also willing to change based on the feedback I get, or at least not react to it or react positively to it. And these are things that we're not very good at. When we're dealing with identity, I'm part of a society that values flat earth, this is the way it is, and everybody else is lying, and whatever. We are being attacked by everyone. Well, going through this process of discovering and learning is very difficult. Now, when we talk about the manipulating or whatever, there are different ways to nudge people, and this is a whole area, and this is your area more than mine, which is how do you nudge people to at least think or reflect or slow down before you press. And this is one of the things that they do today with moderation. Let's say if on WhatsApp a message was forwarded a lot, they don't allow you to forward it to everyone on your list. They will limit you to 3 or 1 now, depending on how many times it was forwarded. So there are things that we can do through systems or through just a quick reminder to do it. Now, how do you encourage people to change? This is a problem we have in society because we are facing a lot of areas where we need to change or change the way we think about different topics.
Mm-hmm.
I would like to thank you both. And I wanted to comment on what you mentioned about forwarding one of the messages. That's kind of like a intervention, but not a strategy, I would say, for everyone to be using not to distribute more fake news. And one thing that my colleague has really mentioned here is that how do we foster the critical thinking? Because it's one of the challenges as well. I think most of the people, first of all, get their sources, they're whether inclined to the left or to the right. So most of the time when they check news, they check whatever they believe is supposed to be right. Okay, so it cannot be labeled. If I get my sources in social truth, I don't think I would like to look at anything that is opposing that. So I think that solves the problem. But I have a question for you, Shibl, which is more technical. And that is, you mentioned that accuracy that you have for the model is about 60 to 65% right now, and they're pre-trained. Considering the way that the fake news is evolving, how can we make sure that these pre-trained models are still effective, in future?
Yeah, I think that's a very good question. Because don't forget that you create a system to detect fake news, and if you use that system to actually block a lot of people, then the people who are manufacturing fake news are going to use your system to basically tune the fake news so it passes through your system. So that's one of the challenges of building any system, is that if the system is static, the people can bypass it because they can just use it to find an entry and then they enter from that place. So if we are using pre-trained models, which are very static because you can't change the training every day. Typically, these are released every 3 months or 6 months or something like that. Then the attackers, like the fakers, can easily bypass them. So we have to come up with innovative strategies that are robust. One innovative strategy is, for example, one simple way to use LLMs to check fake news is to have rubrics. So what is a rubric? It's basically a checklist. So you say, okay, is the source trustworthy? Is the message emotional? And so on. And then you can use these rubrics. So you ask the language model to evaluate on these criteria. So there's one technique that has been used in many cases, in many situations, and I think could be applied to fake news as well, is instead of you giving the rubrics, you ask the language model to generate the rubrics. So then that creates a system that's slightly harder to bypass because these rubrics are changing every time because the language model is coming up with them. But even that I don't think is sufficient. So other techniques could be that even though the language model is fixed, you are collecting data, and then this data is given to the language model as part of the context that the language. So the context is what is the input of the language model. So if, for example, we have a way to detect certain fake news. So for example, we have humans who are finding few fake news, even if they find 1,000 examples. These 1,000 examples then can go to a database, and then this database can feed the context of these language models. So this way, the fakers, as they try to bypass you, they find a way, they enter it, but then the humans detect it, and now this is given to the context of the LLM, and then that can close the loop. So there are techniques like this that can be done, but it's always going to be a challenge.
To complement what Shibl is saying is that language evolves. When I talk to my children, who are no longer children, they're adults, I have seen certain expressions, certain words, or even different ways of communicating that have changed between my time and with them. So the systems have to adapt. You have to create a system which is adaptive, and this is where you need to build these systems that could go back and be updated, where if it's static, we're constantly updating it, because those who want to create fake news are very motivated. The same as spammers, the same as people that are doing all these canular on the internet, where they're trying to get into you to spend money on something, etc. It's amazing to see how sophisticated the scams are and how they go about it. And it's virtually impossible to have a model that is static or set in stone that'll catch them all. Like some of them, it's obvious, and some of them, even in 10 years, people are going to use the same techniques, but we have to always move with the times. And this is where the human in the loop, or at least someone who's monitoring, checking, there's discussions happening. Okay, we're seeing a lot of these. We're seeing, let's give credit where it's due. Spam, the eternal problem, has been nearly solved, but every now and then, some things make it through. But the amount of messages that don't make it through is incredibly high. And that's what we are trying to do, and this is what all these systems, we would love them to do, which is at least highlight there's a problem. Flag, okay, look at this. Nudge people to look at it, nudge the company to look at it, but not necessarily push people out unless they're bots or bad actors. Unless we need to define those well too.
We got another question over here.
So first of all, thank you very much. Very interesting talk. But you may have answered my question or major part of it. I will still ask it. What's the biggest challenge you think? How can we make sure that these deep learning models are kept, effective and relevant? Although you mentioned very important points like credibility, vectorizing, clustering, or like dimensions of the word, the checklist, the rubric, I mean. But will we have like models shadowing the counter-attacking models? I don't know. What's the biggest challenge in your opinion?
So, I see there are two challenges. One is video. So for me, that's a huge challenge. That's a huge problem that is waiting, that's happening probably in 18 months from now. It's going to be very big. The other challenge is adaptive attackers. So adaptive attackers will not do fake news, like just one piece of fake news and then try to send it virally. They will create fake news specifically designed for you. And this was impossible before, or it was very expensive, so which means it's impossible economically before. But now with language models, let's say you're on Twitter, the language model can read all of your tweets, and they can find exactly what is your weak point and how much to push you in the fake direction. And I think that's going to be very hard to solve, and as well very effective. The reason it's very hard to solve because while before you had like this one big piece of fake news that is being viral, so you can look at the context, you can look at many aspects that will allow you to define it as fake. Now it's going to be micro fake news, and each piece of it is different. And each piece is designed for a different person, so the characteristics are not very clear. So I think that's going to be an interesting challenge.
I've seen in the past, talking about adaptive, there's also organizations or news agencies that will, for the longest of times, give you a certain type of message, but every now and then, until they establish what I would call credibility, and every now and then they'll insert something which is less credible or patently fake. And you're suddenly saying, wait, what happened here? I don't believe it. Like, these guys have been consistent over the years on different topics, yet now suddenly there's this piece of news that doesn't make any sense whatsoever. And it sounds very real, very right, and it's coming from a very credible source. How do you deal with those? Like, are those state actors? Is it just an individual within an organization that has a certain bias that once in a while will come out? How do we deal with things such as, if we take Wikipedia, we view that as a source of truth. However, there's a lot of activity going on in Wikipedia, and if you look at certain areas, they're very political. And you have a certain amount, if you go back and you look at what's going on in the background, there's a lot of discussions going on between the moderators where somebody will change a text and somebody else will go back and rechange the text, and there's this back and forward going on a constant basis. How do you deal with that? And what is fact? We go back to is it the Che Guevara approach or not?
Fact or fake?
Exactly. So there's a lot of thinking that needs to happen here, and it's not easy. And things change. Like, let's take the simple example of COVID happened, and we're still dealing with the consequences of COVID. We still have people that believe it was a conspiracy, some people that believe it's this, some people believe that the government did things because it was convenient for them or they were trying to control us. Very interesting discussion, not to be held right now, but it's how do we deal with it, and how do we flag things, or how do we help the organizations do it, because it's a fool's errand to run after everything.
We have more questions from the audience?
Yeah, I've been first all the time.
Hi, thanks for the very interesting conversation. I am a bit curious about the standards or regulations. So with these deepfake threats all over the world, I think all the countries are struggling with the laws and regulations. And when we look at the deepfake moderation, or better to say content moderation or fact checking, every big platform has their own rules as far as I understand. So there is hardly any synchronization. So can we have any global standards, or still it's too early, or maybe that's not the best solution? Any thoughts on that?
If you look at the platforms, the simple answer I'll tell you is, who owns the platforms right now, or where are they based? Most of the platforms are North American, or what's the other country? China. Do we have anything in between? We have some, but in general, you're dealing with two big elephants. So what synchronization can you have between China and the US? Virtually nil, because we're talking about economic enemies and competitors. They're big competitors to each other. So the areas of commonality, there are areas of commonality. However, it's difficult to get people to agree on them. We have Europe, which is very strong on regulation. However, the North American companies will say they're strong on regulation because they don't have any companies, so it's easy for them to just regulate everybody else, not themselves. Well, or the very few that they have, it's okay. It's not worth it. So it's this, what you're bringing up is a very, very important point. And law, up to now, it's not up to now. Law is local. When we talk about regulation, you don't have global regulations. You have local law and agencies that talk to each other and learn from each other. Quebec is very close, to my understanding, to California, actually, when it comes to regulation, even though we're dealing with very different mindsets and ways of operating. However, recently, California has been very strong on privacy for many good reasons. Quebec is very strong on privacy. We're closer to Europe than we are to the US in general. But things are changing.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is to come up with the intelligent regulation that can help. For fake news, I can't see the regulation, but I do see something where more of an organizational agreement between news sources that they put, for example, every piece of news they have in a standard repository where people can check against it, or sharing data sets or doing things like that. I think that can have a lot of value. For regulation, it depends on what regulation, but I'm not seeing the one that will actually solve that problem.
We had another question up front.
Yeah. So thank you so much for the details, but I want to put on the table one term, an example that, because we are the majority here, we are Syrians, so the term of war in Syria. When we search about it, Wikipedia said it's a civil war. Politicians from the Western camp said it's a civil war. In Syria, politicians said, or says, it's a war against Syria. But the reality exists in the definition of the terms itself. So it's about what means civil war. Foreign power, the implication of foreign power in this war, or between two parts from the same nationality. So is the AI can make this critical thinking based on this definition, the right definition, or based on the quantity of the words, or like the research in Wikipedia or in research centers or whatever. So it's from where we have to have this right information.
Yeah, so I think this is a very good example and very good question. But it goes back to the human factor and the fact that even fact checkers that are neutral or AI, so let's think of AI let's think of an ideal AI it's a neutral fact checker. Because this AI is not sitting on the ground and taking photos, it has to go down to some level of truth, and then it has to trust some source. So the sources it trusts will color the result that it has, and it's the person who designs this AI or configures it who selects these sources depending on their preferences. This is why I'm a big advocate of giving the user capability so that the user can select their sources rather than being controlled by some entity that decides what is the truth, because it's not clear, because very, very intelligent people on many of these topics disagree. So we can't even tell. There is no means by which we can solve many of these questions, even through deep discussion. So by giving the user choices, at least they can see, okay, if I choose this source, this is the result. And I know in the case of Syria, I know many of my friends, what they do is they consciously try to go and see news sources from certain, they check certain sources that are on one side, certain sources that are on the other side, and then they try to find sources in the middle. Like, for example, India is sort of neutral, so they go to Indian sources if they are very, very committed to understanding what's happening. But so even the human has to go and check these sources. So I think at the end, the ground is the human truth, as Nabil said it. So AI is not going to save us. Only we can save ourselves.
This goes back to the question about what is opinion, what is fact, how do we interpret reality? And all of us have very, very different interpretations of reality. If we are in Canada, conservative versus liberal. If you're in the US, Republican versus Democrat. If you're in Syria, one side versus another. All of these exist, and it's very difficult to get the different sides to agree on commonality. So then this is where, for example, Facebook faced a lot of criticism because they were saying, or the conservatives or the Republicans, to be more precise, who are conservative in their thought processes, were saying the system is biased against us. Our articles get more flagged than the liberal outcomes. How come? This is not right. We are kind of half of the population. This doesn't make any sense whatsoever. We should not be throttled. Our articles should be out there. Then you get the liberal side that will argue, well, no, you guys are talking out of your hat. You're talking emotionally. You're saying this. You're saying that. You're inconsistent in your saying. It all becomes a question of how do you interpret things, and this is something that we have to deal with, and this is why critical thinking is very important. I deal a lot with visualizations in my work. You can make a visualization nearly say anything you want. And this is, we have a statistician in here, or someone with a statistician's background. You can make statistics say anything if you really want to. So how do we agree? Or do we agree to disagree? And I think the key point in many aspects, and I'm not going to go down the political rat holes that we can go down, is we have to have at least civil discussions around where things are and what are the boundaries, and say, this is we can talk about, this is what we cannot talk about, this is what we agree or disagree on. We're using the UN definition of, so I stand my ground on this one, I will not move, and the other side will say, no, you don't know what you're talking about. Okay, fine, we're good, we're still friends. It's easy for us to do that when we're far away from the problem. Living the problem is a bit different, but I'll stop on this one.
Can I add something?
Sure.
So I said that AI cannot save us, but AI can help us save ourselves. Because like right now, news sources are very incentivized to take one position versus another, because they will sell more pages and more views. But what AI can do is it can look at multiple news sources, and it won't be able to give you the answer in the case of Syria or in these very complex cases, but it can give you the 2 points of view. So whenever you could create, if you are motivated to have a more balanced view, you can, instead of having to go to 6 news sources, you can ask AI to gather the sources, give you a summary. And typically what I've seen just from personal experience is that when you ask a complex question to the current models, they will tell you, oh, there is this opinion, and they will explain to you why, and then there is that opinion, they will explain to you why. And you can even change the prompt in a way that you can say, please give me the 2 points of view and defend them carefully. Then you can get both points of view. So at least it allows you to open your mind a bit when you are using this kind of medium.
Can I add more question? So how we can protect us from the dictatorship of the social media itself? Because they hide a lot of posts or when using terms. So it's also some kind of politics that exerts against opinions. So it's one thing that put us out of the one-way stream of politics or opinion that AI maybe can collect data from it?
Well, even before AI, if we go back to the earlier days, how did I start? I said something along the lines of, we have delegated our decision-making when it comes to what is fact or not, what is fake news or not, to these organizations. Unfortunately, we have little diversity when it comes to the organizations themselves. You do not have 20 Facebooks. You do not have 20 alternatives or 10 alternatives or even well, you do have 3 alternatives to Twitter. However, they're not as used. So if you want to be part of the big family, you have to go to Twitter. You want to be part of the social network, there's very little incentive for people, or there's actually a lot of disincentive to move from Facebook to whatever equivalent to Facebook there is. And even if you want to move, or you decide, I'm not very active on Facebook today, I'm only there to check a couple of things once in a while, what do you do? So I want to move, but I can't take my friends with me. All of my friends stayed back there. So I'm actually missing out on the social side. I want to know when somebody, actually what Facebook is for me right now is when people pass away, parents pass away, somebody's sick, that's how I get to hear about it. I'm losing that. So if I don't go onto Facebook, I don't know what's happening in my community. So there is an issue where you do have, I'm not going to use the word a dictatorship, but it's more of a, because you still have a choice. You don't have to go to Facebook. Nobody's forcing you to go onto Facebook. Nobody's forcing you to put an opinion on Facebook, which is contrary to the main view. But the alternatives are not there, and they make it very difficult to move or find an alternative to. So that is something that, one of the good things about, I would say, regulation in Europe was the fact that they allowed me and a lot of other people in North America to download our data from Facebook. I'm not sure if many people know that, but you can download your private data from Facebook. And it's incredibly interesting to go through it, because you'll find things about yourself that you never knew in there. Why did they do it? They didn't do it because they liked or they wanted to help us. Actually, the only reason they did it was because there was a European regulation, GDPR, that forced them. And the way the system was designed made it, to my understanding, made it difficult to make a distinction between European citizens and everyone else. So they made it available to everyone. It's just easier to just download the data. But you can still not use it. Actually, at one time, I started doing some experimentation to create something on top of it where you can reuse that data and understand it or make it visible to people. They can change that anytime. If they start finding that 100,000 people or 1 million people start downloading, or 10 million people start downloading their profiles, they're going to be like, what's going on here? Oh, there's this new platform that's taking that data, putting it up here. They just have to change the order of things or the format, and you can no longer access the data. Or it's a lot of work again to rechange or rejig the formatting. So in a way, this is the problem, which is, how do we deal with the big platforms? And do you have a choice? Mm-hmm. You guys had a nice platform. You decided to kill it. Which one? The social one. Oh. Yeah.
We had several.
Yeah.
But I think I agree with you that being held to few platforms is a big problem for the consumer. What I loved when the web started, which was a long time ago, was that the web was super open. So anyone can start a web server, they can put any information they want, and all of these servers were connected, and it allowed for sharing of information. And there was actually a big boom in innovation at that time. So I would love to see similar things in different spaces. So for example, in the space of social network, to have an open source social network, or an open standards that allow all the social networks to connect, so you can jump from one to the other without having this cost now that's very complicated. But sadly, it didn't happen. So I think as consumers, we should encourage open source initiatives and these kinds of platforms, even though they might be not as convenient as the one that is a monopoly, but they do have, on the long term, they have societal value that they can add.
Please.
So I'm here, one of the reasons, because I'm a parent. And one of the responsibility for me is to guide my kids to pick the right things, which is very hard these days. So fake news originally is content, right? So what we can see now, the advanced technology, I was introduced like last week to Notebook LM. With a few clicks, I was able to create a morning show, The Deep Dive, talking about a small topic I just entered. And I have a music background, and I was like fascinated by the quality of the two people discussing a matter, and it shows like almost two anchors doing a show. You just said like in maybe 18 months, the video will reach that point. So can you see it coming that with this hunger and race to develop AI that create content very close to reality, is there at the same time efforts to create fact-checked? At least, I'm not talking about fake news. Fake news is something created a long time ago when the journalism started. It's politics, it's something else. But I'm talking about content, video or audio. Even a song. I just listened to a song somebody sent me, and he told me, this is 100% AI. Music, lyrics, arrangement, instruments, and a singer. So if it's entertainment, it's okay. If somebody wants to be entertained, nobody force him. But for my kids, in the future, are we going to see a tool allowing us to reliably check if this content is fake or based on AI, and like ethically, is there a push to regulate all the content to be checked? Automatically, if I'm checking on Facebook and a video appears, a small water, what's so called, whatever.
Watermark.
Yeah, this is generated by AI. So can you see it coming? Can we be like optimistic, or there's no hope?
Yeah, so there's two aspects to it. One is the companies that run these LLMs. So the company that runs Notebook LM is actually Google. So the companies have tried to add signatures. So there have been some effort on even to the text to add some. So what they do is, let's say you're generating a text. The text comes up from a language model that selects words, but with a probability distribution. Like, so basically it says, okay, these are the 100 words that you can have. You can do this one 10%, this one 20%, and so on. But what they try to do is to say, okay, I'm going to overlay on this another secret distribution. And that secret distribution, if somebody can read the text later and can detect the secret distribution, so they can tell this was generated by LLM. So this has been tried in multiple places. But the motivated person, so the students basically who want to send a homework, they found systems where they can take the text out of one LLM, they pass it through another LLM, then they send it through. So they found the systems to make this not work. So, and the other thing now is that we have all of these open source models that allow anyone to generate content. So I think the first attack, which is let's put the signature at the source, probably will not work because a motivated person is able to remove the signatures. Then the second attack will be at reception. So my video player will have that capability, and that's an open area of research. So to be honest, I don't know. I would put the probability at 50% that the detection is going to win, and 50% that the attack is going to win. So I don't know what the answer is, but it's a big area, and many people are trying to work on it.
This goes back to ethics and law. Ethics is something people discuss and have very strong opinions on. Law is something which is, I'm not going to use the word immutable, but it's there. If you do not have laws around this, most likely you're not going to have it. In all fairness, when I listen to the researchers at Google talk, there's a lot of work that they're doing when it comes to AI security, when it comes to the ethical side of things, and there has been some very interesting outputs because of that. For example, well, I'm not going to pick on you, but there's been interesting examples that have come up because of the fact that they were trying to be very diverse in their approach. So if you ask for historical figures from a part of Europe, you're going to get people who are dark-skinned, which didn't make much sense at the period that we were talking about. So how do we deal with these? And this is where ethics and law come in, where you start the discussions on the ethics side, but at one point or another, the society has to make a decision. Is this important or not to make it into a law? And what is the impact of having laws? Does it stifle creativity? Does it stop the companies? Should the companies self-regulate the way that Google is working on it today? It's unclear. And this is where we have to wait and see, but waiting and seeing doesn't really help us. This is why these discussions need to happen more and more. Politicians have to be involved in these discussions, and we need to move, we need to move to the next level in these discussions, which is, what do we do?
We had a question online, which I will read out. I don't know if I can. And there's actually two people who are kind of asking the same question and are interested in this answer, which is, one of the biggest challenges in misinformation detection is distinguishing facts from opinions, which often requires human intervention. Is there any research showing that flagging artifacts like visual inconsistencies, such as blinking, pixel patterns, networked signals from the sender, that those could be enough to warn audiences? Instead of verifying truthfulness, this approach would focus on, say, artificial formats, allowing machine learning to detect fake news more quickly without bias.
Yeah, so there has been lots of work. Actually, lots of the early work was done like this because the early models were unable to go into the semantics of the text. So they usually go to the form. And then there is basically two approaches. One is content-based and one is context-based. So I think the questioner is mentioning the context-based approach. So the context-based approach is, where does this come from? How many likes did it get? When was it posted? So all of these are things that are surrounding the piece that you are trying to evaluate that could give you some information. So for example, if most of the fake content is coming from a certain geographic location or certain IP addresses, or you can check, for example, if it's coming from a domain name, when was the domain name created? Is it a fresh domain name? Does it have an owner, or is the owner name? All of these are signals, and then these signals are put together and they are passed through the models, like through classical machine learning. There's as well the content base is, you can look at the words, how many letters are capital, are they passive verb or active verb, are there emotional terms? So you can do all of these features, and with these features you can detect exactly like what the questioner is saying. And then I think today we can do much better with other approaches, but these approaches can be used as a first filter, so to quickly give you, okay, move it up to the next level to check it.
And we have experts here that can talk about this. When a picture is modified or altered, there are ways to check that. Now, very sophisticated actors can make it more difficult to check. However, for most players, like amateurs or semi-professionals, you will still leave a signature when you alter a picture, somehow. I've seen something recently which I found amazing. Let's just do a very specific context where somebody was showing a letter in Arabic. And one of the comments that was made by a fact checker, the font used is this font. This font was only created in this year. The date here doesn't make any sense. There's a mismatch between fonts used, and I was like, amazing. That's a level of thinking I would, I obviously did not think that way, and I found it to be, wow. This is where the human ingenuity, but also understanding what could happen in a letter, what are the things that may or may not happen. We were having a discussion once about a letter that was issued that had one signature on it with a first name, and usually letters from that particular organization usually has 3 signatures, full name, and a date. So certain things that there are certain ways of communicating that are out there that give certain certainty to the answer or not. But how do we solve it? Always unclear to me.
There was a question here.
Yes, thank you for a very, very interesting presentation and interesting questions and interesting answers. I think fake news, detection of fake news is going to stay for many more years, and the fakers will become more and more agile in fabricating the fake news. So we have to work on the detection side. What I'm interested in is also not only fake news, but fake content. And in academia, we have the situation now that artificial intelligence is coming through the back door. We may have not changed the way we teach many of the area, but what is changing is how the work is being delivered to the professor. So it is research I've done with my students. It's 100% of my students use ChatGPT to help them with their project, with their exams, with the quizzes. So what do you see the future of education in this environment? And I know we will not ever block it at the door because this is a resource. And maybe it's the same thing we did when the calculators, fancy calculators appeared. But I am not sure how yet the future will be for university education. So that I'd like to hear your opinion at McGill. What do you do?
We're all struggling with this one. I'm encouraging my students to use ChatGPT and Family, because it's not just ChatGPT. Actually, recently I found it was easier for them to use Studio AI for coding because it's free. You don't have limits on how much you can use it for until a further notice, etc. The challenge is, what are we trying to teach the students? And how do they know? Let's even forget about how do we know? Because at the end of the day, I look at certain times and it's like, if they don't know, if they're able to fake their way through things, too bad, too sad. They're going to hit the reality, which is the job market, and they're going to go through an interview and they cannot have their ChatGPT with them. How do they deal with that situation? They're going to have to answer to it. So using ChatGPT or equivalent or LLMs is not bad, but how do we also define what people should know and how to get there? Actually, I was just discussing with Shibl before walking in here about we test people who come from different backgrounds on their knowledge of linear algebra and stats before they do data science type programs, because if you don't know those, you're going to run into problems when you're doing statistical machine learning. Just the simplest of examples. You would understand this one perfectly. So we have an assessment. I actually gave the assessment to ChatGPT, and I know what score we will get by just feeding the questions into it. And if somebody answers and gets that score, we know what has happened. But I look at it from the other side, which is, I don't really even want to assess the student. The student should come to me saying, I want to learn about this topic. I want to learn about statistical machine learning. What do I need to do? Can you give me a tool that will help me get there? I want to be ready. How do I be ready? Because at the end, you have this big challenge of, you're going to go to the job market. You're going to have to solve problems. You can't just depend on the machine. Should you learn how to code? Well, the LLM will give you the code. But what happens if you run into problems? So today I ask students, when they're doing assignments, when they're giving me an answer, I tell them, have you used ChatGPT or have you used Gen AI or not? And please tell me where you need help or what areas that you had difficulties with. Because I ran into the issue of I don't even know what to correct anymore, because it's actually very difficult to correct ChatGPT. The level of output is good enough to pass. So it's like, okay, after one or two, yes, there are certain things that it might make a mistake on, and I can trick them, and I've done that where I create data sets with little problems that if you don't tell the LLM that the problem is there, you'll only discover it later on. So you ask them in question number 4, did you do this? And suddenly it's like, oh, I should have done it. They have to go back to step number 1 and redo everything, that means they've learned something. I'm happy with that. So we're all struggling with this, and this is a problem that all educators will have. And the real problem is very similar to the problem I have when I go to see a doctor. My doctor has this mug on his desk saying, "You may have Google, but I'm the doctor." Something like that, but not. But the truth is, we have all these. How do you build up that experience? How do you have them solve enough problems that they understand what's going on? That's the challenge we have as educators, and it's not going to be solved overnight. We're going to have to change our way of operating, and the students will have to change also how they learn, because they have to recognize when they do not know something. That's the most difficult part, is that. I give the example of maps. Like, this is kind of a side. We always used to use maps in the old days. You wanted to go anywhere in Montreal, you had this huge map that you had to put out, and you had to look at the coordinates. You had to say, I'm here, I want to go there, this is how I would do it, etc. Now, everybody uses their GPS. And they don't even, sometimes you don't even need to use it, you still put it. Why? It's easier. One of my friends tells me, when I asked him the question, well, you've been coming to my house for 20 years. Why do you put the stupid thing on? He says, I like to hear her voice. You know, nice justification. The truth is, we are hitting the point where nobody knows how to read a map anymore. At least the younger generation. But is it a skill that's important? Like, those are things that we need to ask ourselves. What is important, what isn't? And those are fundamental discussions we have to have. What do students have to learn? You know, engineering curricula have not changed much in the last 20 or 30 years. Actually, in some areas, yes, but many of it is we can always argue that the basics are always the same. So is it we're trying to teach them the basics? What are the basics? What are we trying to teach them to work into a job market? Those are things that we have to struggle with.
I think what you said covers a lot of these things. I don't know if we have time. I have a question for Rana. Do we still have time? So Rana, you worked on the impact of emotion on detection of fake news.
On the perception of fake news. So not just detection, it's on belief and intent to share. So it's those two factors.
Did you come up with, like, while doing this, is there something you thought of that can help in combating the spread of fake news?
So actually, it's interesting that you asked me that, because we were talking about critical thinking, which is what my professor asked earlier on. So I just finished analyzing the first experiment that we ran, and there is a construct called actively open-minded thinking. So this is your predisposition to be open to other opinions, to pause before answering, to critically think about whatever it is that you're evaluating, and then give a response. And what was shown was that those with high AOT, actively open-minded thinking, high, not low or moderate. Of course, this is my sample, and this is, you know, it's a normal sample, but you can only be so normal. It is a sample, so it's not the population. What we found was that those with high AOT were protected from the impact of emotion, because my research, as well as previous research, has shown that any emotion, regardless of valence, so positive or negative emotion, that impacts your perception. So you're more likely to believe fake news, and you're more likely to share it. So there are two kind of vectors. There's the valence vector, so how positive or negative whatever you're feeling, and there's the arousal vector, so the intensity of the emotion. And our research shows that increased arousal, regardless of valence, leads to more belief, like an impacted ability to discern between real and fake news. But those with high AOT, and this is how we analyzed that, this is all self-report, this was all online experiments, were actually protected. So I can show you the curves. We have arousal on the x-axis, we have correct answers, so basically performance. And you'll see that, as arousal increases, you'll see that the performance is going down. And then for those with high AOT, it's exactly the opposite. So it's actually reversed. We did not observe that at all for those with low AOT. For those with moderate AOT, it was still a negative line, but the slope was less. So that I think that kind of ties in with what Nabil was talking about, with maybe we can have some kind of reflection prompts that can alert the user that, all right, maybe this is, you need to think about this. Wait before you share, wait before you like, wait before you comment. So this is our research right now. Our next step, as I mentioned earlier, is to incorporate a continuous measure of arousal through the electrodermal activity and the eye tracking. So that's to be determined. But right now, for critical thinking, this is this is what we have available for us in the fake news context. Intuitively, it makes sense. If you're open to other opinions, and if you pause before you answer, and you're not reflective right away, then you're more likely to be more critical in your thought process. But it was nice to see it. It was nice to see the curves exactly showing the opposite.
And is there some work on this AOT? Is it learned? Is it something that is a personality trait?
It's a self-report. So you're basically, I think it was 8 items that we asked them, things about how open you are to opinions. So again, they answer on a scale, and then we calculate their score. So this is a construct that it's a self-report. There's no way for us to measure it. What we can measure in a lab setting is the arousal, their how often, like Mahdi said, or I think it was you who mentioned the eye tracker experiment. That's exactly it. It's before you even have a reaction, you have an innate reaction with your eyes. If you have an EEG on your head, then you're measuring the electric currents that are going through your brain. So that's all, I think, next step to see where we can have an impact. But the problem, the gap really that exists right now in the literature is that everything so far that we've seen in terms of combating fake news has been restricted to cognitive factors. And they've kind of left emotion on the side. And our argument is that, well, there's a missing piece of the puzzle. We can't just think about critical thinking. Yes, it helps, and we see that in our results, but we have to consider the emotional aspect.
But your proposal is to activate this AOT within the moment that the news is shared? During.
Yes.
But is there as well educational things that can be done
of course.
Because this AOT is a trait, like in the sense that the person reported it before the experiment was run.
It was actually after the test, but I mean, we measured many things. We looked at, for example, AOT in the literature has been inversely correlated with religious fundamentalism or dogmatism. It's correlated with mindfulness. So things, again, that are very intuitive, but it's nice to have the constructs that we can measure. Again, this is all self-report, so do with that what you will. We have to take it with a grain of salt. But the data is consistent that those who have high dogmatism, high scores of fundamentalism, they actually score very low on AOT and vice versa. So we don't have a measure for AOT. We did, for example, employ a cognitive test. So these are questions like GMAT style questions, and those who are in the PhD program will know what I'm talking about. But these are questions that have a very obvious and incorrect intuitive response. That if you don't have generally a high AOT disposition, you will answer the incorrect answer. If you pause to think about it, then you will give the right answer. So we had that, and that was also correlated, not as strongly as actively open-minded thinking. So it's actually interesting because the intent to be open and the intent to critically evaluate scores higher than the critically evaluation, like the act of critically evaluating itself. So that was something that also was interesting. But yeah, I think that's where we're headed. We're hoping that there could be something, especially on social media. You mentioned, that people will share something even though they know it's not true. There is actually a phenomenon that explains this. It's called the accuracy sharing dissociation. So there are different accounts. So there's the confusion-based account. So I really am sharing something because I believe that it's true, and even though it's fake news. There's a preference-based account. So I know it's not true, but I will share it because it's in line with what I believe, and I have my biases and so on. And then there's the inattention-based account, which is just being on social media, being overwhelmed with, you're scrolling through everything, and you're just not attentive to what's going on. So you might share something, and not because you believe it, and not because you don't believe it, but because you're not paying attention. So AOT, cognitive thinking, critical thinking, we need this. I mean, I don't think we can survive without it, but we'll see how that's going to be implemented. I think there has to be something systemic, that we can have on these platforms that can kind of change the course of things. But À suivre.
Yeah. And probably this goes to your question, is what to do with educating children, is that
Yeah.
you have to give them AOT.
Yeah.
Or have them go up on the
Yeah, increase their AOT score as they age. Any other questions?
We could clap. That's a great idea. Rana, did you have any final words? Or
No, that's it. I just
That's
wanted to thank my panelists. So a great, great discussion. Thank you so much. As always, I learn a lot from the both of you. I hope the audience enjoyed this as much as I did. I thank the audience once again for being here on this very cold day, the coldest day we've had so far. So much appreciated to see you here. And yes, hopefully we'll do another discussion like this sometime soon, maybe at Fourth Space again. And we'll have, you guys can come again and ask these interesting questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ron. Just to let you know, everyone online, we'll be closing up the Zoom and the live stream now, but remember that this conversation remains available on our YouTube channel. You should revisit it, you should share it. Really great to have everyone here. Wonderful conversation, of course, but also the questions. Really appreciate that. Okay, that's enough from us, and hope to have you all back soon.